Woman, a program by, for, and about women today, with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening, and welcome to Woman. Our topic tonight is the sexual abuse of children. With me is Florence Rush. Florence is a social worker who works with children. She is currently writing a book on the sexual abuse of children. Also with me is Linda Sanford. Linda is a social worker. She is director of the Rape Prevention Forum in Seattle, Washington, and she speaks to parents on sexual abuse of children. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Do we know how much sexual abuse of children is going on in the United States today?
Well, as far as I know, there are no statistics which will reveal the exact figures. The guess is that it is much higher than the battered child. There are no national statistics. The FBI crime report does not give a breakdown of this kind, so that we don't have specific information. We know that it occurs. We know that it occurs very, very frequently, but there are no actual numbers to identify the enormity of the problem.
Linda, in your area, you've been working very closely with this kind of thing. What are the figures like in your area?
Well, the Children's Protective Service, which handles the kinds of cases that are reported within families, they have 750 families on their caseload every month in King County. 700 of those families are there for neglect or other kinds of abuse, and 50 are there for sexual abuse of their children.
It's incredible. I mean, it's a lot more than one would think, isn't it?
Definitely. Yes, I think that in terms of our statistics, we are where we were with rape about 15 years ago. People aren't reporting. There really aren't that many resources available to them, and we really have no idea how many.
Yeah, so the figure you just mentioned is the other reported cases?
Yes, just reported. I think we
Mhm.
could probably safely estimate maybe 10 times as many going on in actuality. Would you agree with that?
Easily, easily 10
at
times.
least.
Perhaps even more.
Do you think we have a proper image of the person who is doing sexually molesting? Is it always male? Is it male and female? I mean, what is our picture versus the reality?
Well, in terms of the just general child molester, it is almost always male. He tends to be under 40. I think most of us have the image of a dirty old man in a black wrinkled up raincoat who sits in the park on a cloudy day with a bag of candy and asks little girls to come over. It's not that kind of person at all. He's generally employed, and he's the same race and social class as the child, and in about 70% of the cases at least, the child knows exactly who it is. It's not a stranger.
Yeah, most frequently it's a family member, a neighbor, a community member who is known to the family and to the child. And the problem is quite an acute one, because this person is liked and trusted by the child, so that when the molestation does take place, it results in a very, very difficult situation for the child, for the total family, because this is somebody that they all know and perhaps even like.
Is there a child that's more apt to be molested than one kind of child than another kind?
Well, unfortunately, it is 3/4 girls at least, and often more. And it's strange because girls are vulnerable at any age to sexual molestation, whereas boys tend to be vulnerable just within a certain age group of about 9 to 14. That's a generalization, but the important point is that girls are molested much more often, and they're molested at all ages.
Is there something that parents can do to prevent this from happening? Because parents, I'm sure, feel very guilty when this happens to their children.
There are some things, and it's, there's a long list of precautionary measures, very long list. Generally, the local police departments are very helpful to families in figuring out what some of those things are. Generally, they need to talk to the child about it. They need to warn them. Sometimes parents are afraid to do that because they don't want their children to be suspicious of strangers or to become skeptical. I think even if you warn your child badly, it's better than not warning them at all. You really need to sit down and talk about it. And talk about it many times, not just once.
It would be very difficult to walk that fine line because you don't want to make them afraid.
Well, it's an extremely sensitive and touchy subject, because the child molester is predominantly not a stranger, but a family member or a family friend. Now, the picture is conjured up as to how do I tell my little girl to be afraid of Cousin Willie or Uncle Charlie, and somebody that we all know and like. But my feeling is that little girls should be told about it and should be apprised of this danger. And I think that if it is recognized that the child can be molested and abused, that the child's own sense of her own reality and self-esteem will be supported. That is, that if she has been molested by a member of the family, and that molestation has not been denied, and it is seen as a reality, and it is dealt with as a reality, the child will not be faced with the confusion and the ambivalence and the guilt that she might be otherwise if it goes unsupported. Yes, I would sacrifice the family relative for the child. I think it's worth it.
Linda, be a little more specific, because I know you talk to parents directly about some of the things they can do and can't do. At least be specific about how to handle this problem of telling.
Okay, well, I think the point I made originally about telling them more than once is important. Kids get thousands of instructions every day to brush their teeth, to clean their room, not to run out in front of cars, not to go near strange dogs. They don't do all that just because they hear it once. And I think that the more we can deal with this subject in a matter-of-fact manner, that this is unpleasant, but it is a reality of life. It's just like you can't walk up to every strange dog you meet, okay? So we go over those kinds of situations with your child. One of the main things that I recommend is what I call the what-if game, sort of making a family theater about this. If you're into bribing your child, reward them for getting the right answer, and play out some of the situations. One thing that's used with stranger molestation is, come see my puppies, come see my cat. And I think first time you ask your child, what would you do? I will bet you anything that your child is going to say, oh, I'd go see it. You know, so go over that and make that perfectly clear with your child until it's become very ingrained. The child's best defense is going to be a lack of confusion about what they should do about that situation. The other thing is that the secret is used a lot in these kinds of cases, whether it's someone in your family or a stranger. You know, it's not a weapon, it's not a threat of I'm going to beat you up. It's let's have this little secret.
Don't tell mommy.
Right, and this will be our little story and our little relationship. And if you teach your child not to get into that kind of bond, that's going to be very helpful to them if you instill that reflex that there's something wrong here.
Are kids believed? It's my impression that they aren't believed when they suddenly do tell someone.
Well, I think a lot of it might depend upon who's doing the molesting.
If it's a stranger, are they believed?
If it's a stranger, well, we were just talking about this before, and what happens is that in certain areas where it is where a stranger is molesting a child, let us say in a poverty area, I don't think that the child would be as readily believed, because these are areas where all kinds of assaults and crimes, and children are exposed to much greater dangers in this area. And even if it's believed, it is not responded to with the same intensity as it might be in a middle-class area where the families are have the capacity to react to this. I think in that area they would react. A child molester in a middle-class area would be apprehended and would create quite a stir.
Well, and I think this is very sad. You know, it's interesting because we talk about burglary prevention and we talk about arson prevention, and we don't talk about all the false reports. You know, we don't talk about all the people who up their insurance claims on a burglary, or people who set their own businesses on fire. Whenever we talk about sexual abuse of anything, one of the main things that we hear about is the false report, and it just does not happen that often.
You would include rape in that?
Definitely, you know, and especially with children. Most of them do not have the sophistication or the motivation to go around making things up.
Yes, that's true. Children have to talk out of their own experience.
Right.
If they haven't experienced it, it hasn't happened. And the chances that somebody is going to sit and teach them or brief them on telling such a story is very, very unlikely.
What about the law enforcement agencies? How responsive are they to a call from a hysterical parent, or a non-hysterical parent for that matter, saying my child has just been molested? What's their procedure? How do they respond to it?
Well, they come around and they start gathering the information, and also, if you want a case, you need somebody there who's witnessed it. In some instances, with rape, they've done away with corroboration, but not with child molestation. It still persists. The corroboration still persists. Then you have this very, very serious problem of having the child act as a witness in this very, very difficult situation, particularly if it's a family member. Interestingly enough, in Israel, where they do have child molestation, they have somebody come in to act in behalf of the child, somebody who gathers the information, and who will, if it comes into court, who will appear in court for the child. They do not require the presence of the child to confront the abuser or the offender and say, yes, he's the one.
It would seem to me that it would be just terrible for a child to have to tell the story over and over again.
Frequently, families have dropped charges because the strain has been so difficult on the child, and it has been so hard on the family and the child.
You really bring up an important point there. In King County, if you prosecute a case like this, the chances are that your child has told that story 5 or 6 times at least by the time you get into the courtroom. Also, just as a corollary to that, the child should not have to listen to the story over and over again. Many times the mother will call up the aunts and the grandmother and the neighbors and, did you hear about this terrible thing that happened to Susie or Johnny? And that's not good for the child either. The child shouldn't have to tell it over and over again, and they shouldn't have to hear it. It starts getting a life of its own after a while.
All right, if a child is molested by a stranger, does this mean that this child is fixed for life? This will have a bad impact on the child? The child may be maladjusted? Is this a certainty under those conditions?
No, that's what the movies tell us, don't they? Lots of times they grow up and become criminals or something. No, that's really not true. One of the things that intervention is very important. It is important to see a social worker, see somebody. Also, the medical exam is very important, even though they're probably, the kinds of, there's not severe injuries very often, but it's still important for that child to have an exam and to know that their body's okay, to know that it hasn't changed because of this event. And so that's important, and I think if you take some of those steps, you can really alleviate a lot of the long-term harm. The most important variable is how the parents react to it, and especially with small children, they'll directly mirror whatever the parent's reaction is, and if the parent is hysterical and very upset, then before long they will be too.
There's another kind of sexual abuse, isn't there? And that's the kind that happens in the home, and we call it incest, and it's one of the strongest taboos in society, not only in this country, but everywhere. And it's also, you know, a kind of taboo to talk about, too, and especially on television. But I would like to get into it, and I would like you to do the same kind of thing you did with the molestation with a stranger. Give me a kind of profile of incest and what happens, and who the attacker is and who the victim is likely to be.
Well, father-daughter incest is the most common, and I think that's a surprise to most people. It's natural father-daughter. The fathers tend to be, in their late 30s. They're non-psychotic. When we take people to prisons and hospitals and test them, they do not come off as psychotic or very, very sick people. They generally are fairly upstanding members of the community, you know, just your regular folk. You know, the guy down the block.
In other words, you can't tell, and it's as with the rapist. I mean, it's
exactly. They don't have horns or drag their knuckles or anything like that. It'd be so nice if they did. Yeah. No, it's nothing like that at all. The daughters, on the average, are 13 years old, and the incestuous relationship generally goes on from about 3 to 5 years. And they tend to be more physically developed, more attractive than other girls their age. Now, those are all generalizations. I think it's really important as the audience listens to Florence and I talk about this subject that they don't start to over-identify with different things that we say. We may say one thing that fits in a family you know or your own family, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an incestuous family.
One of the questions, I think, you know, I think it's very shocking to most people, the fact that incestuous relationships can go on for so long, as you say, 3 to 5 years. And the one question that comes to mind, if it is a father-daughter relationship, does the mother know about it?
In most of the instances that have come to my attention, I think the mother does know, and most certainly most of the daughters who've reported it feel very strongly that the mother does know, but for whatever her reasons, she cannot handle it, she cannot deal with it. And she cannot deal with it in the same way that many mothers cannot deal with certain abuses that exist within the family generally, precisely because she is dependent upon the father. And her whole identity is tied up with being a mother and a wife and having this man as her husband. And she cannot give that up. So her immediate reaction is to deny that it existed, that the child made it up, that she told a lie. This is very sad, but it's true. And
so are you saying that you think children who are victims in an incestuous situation are less likely to be believed?
Yes, definitely. That is precisely what I'm saying. I'm saying that if it's incest, they're less likely to be believed. If it is a total stranger, if the family can say, nobody's going to lay a hand on my daughter, nobody's going to touch her, and then you picture this psychopathic fiend lurking in an alley, it's very easy to express anger against that person who's assaulting my child. But if that person is a husband or an uncle or somebody who the family knows, even somebody who the family likes, it's very hard to work up that kind of anger. All kinds of ambivalence set in. All kinds of excuses are made for the father. One of the excuses that he often makes is that I couldn't help it, my wife wouldn't sleep with me, or the kid was really getting very sexy, she's growing up, I'm only human.
What about alcohol?
Yes, I was drunk when it happened. I didn't know what I was doing. Or blaming the child, or as you said, what was it? Blaming the child, the wife, or his
right,
mother.
This is a defense that's
Right,
often
yes.
used when the cases are prosecuted, that either it's the daughter's fault, even though she's 8 or 9,
Right.
because she's so seductive, he just couldn't help himself, you know, and who in that position could not go through something like that. And if it's not the daughter's fault, then it's the wife's fault. And of course, if she'd been a good wife and met all his needs, he wouldn't have to fool around with kids. And if it's not the daughter or the wife's fault, then it's his mother's fault. Because if she'd raised him right, he wouldn't have grown up to be the kind of guy who messes around with kids. So we often find in the legal defenses that it becomes every other woman's fault in his life other than the man who actually did was involved in the incestuous relationship. The point that Florence makes about the mothers is really important, and I think traditionally, if the mother's given the choice between the father leaving the home or the daughter leaving the home, she'll feel a lot more secure and it's probably more beneficial to keeping the family together if the daughter leaves the home. Okay, so very often they have chosen to keep the marriage intact. But I see this
So the
changing.
daughter is in effect punished.
Right, exactly. But I think with the new resources that are coming about in society and women supporting each other, and I like to attribute some of it to assertiveness training, we're seeing a change in the mothers, and now they seem to be coming around to stand up for the daughters more often, and feeling like, well, maybe they can emotionally and financially make it without that man.
Well, isn't it true that the onus is on the mother? I mean, we are always saying if the
onus,
mother could
yes.
do something about it,
Well,
and
the
is
onus,
that right?
Listen, that's my pet subject, is everything I do is wrong as a mother, you see. And, but I think that what it does is really clarify the essential, what women in the women's movement are talking about today, the essential differences, not different but equal, but actually unequal, and the double standards that exist for both, the one standard for men and one standard for women. The girl is the victim and she's to blame. The man is the offender and he's not to blame. He is really, if we look at the statistics, if we look at the case records, he is more readily forgiven than the child who's been sexually abused and used. And that is because the child is Eve. It's been that way for thousands and thousands of years. And the man is somehow, some way, has this raging sexual passion that is understood.
It's a Lolita situation, isn't it?
Right,
Exactly.
right. And as in Lolita, this man wanted the little girl and she wound up seducing him. And that is a picture we constantly get, that the seduction comes from from the child. Now, one of the things I remember that I've always said when I go around speaking and people say, what about the child, isn't she seductive? Why is it that when sex is concerned, the blame is always on the little girl? Let's say there was a man and a little girl, and the little girl saw this beautiful doll in the window and said, I want you to go in there and steal it for me. Now, if he did that, that would never be an excuse in a courtroom. Nobody would ever accept that. What do you mean? This kid told you to steal it and you're going to go steal it? But if a kid walks around and acts sexy, can't help myself, and everybody understands it. It's just like, okay. But it is only in situations of sex that suddenly the little girl, no matter how young, is a temptress, and the man, no matter how old and in control, can't help himself when it comes to his passion.
One of the real sad things about this whole thing, and I know you're both going to scream at me for this, but it appears that there's no way out of this situation. It seems that our system is not responsive to it really, and that it ends up destroying the family almost always.
I disagree really strongly.
I know you
with
do.
that, yes. Well, you know, one thing that we didn't mention when we were talking about the onus being on the mother is that very often the mother is a victim of incest herself as a child, and she grows up and marries someone who will do the same thing to her children. I think that as we see women maybe leaving their husbands or dealing with them in a more straightforward manner, you know, protecting the child, I think we're going to start seeing that syndrome broken that goes on from generation to generation. I personally believe a great deal in a program that's in Santa Clara County in California, and it's the first regional incest counseling center in the nation.
It's the only one
It's
still,
the
isn't
only
it?
one still, and it deals purely with incest, and it was started and still is directed by a man named Hank Giaretto. They feel it's very important to get the family in at the time of discovery, at that crisis point, and that's very true. And they will do a very long-term family therapy. It ends up being about 100 hours, and it's not just family therapy. They start out with individual therapy, mother-daughter therapy, father-daughter therapy, family therapy. The daughters are in groups with each other, and the parents are in groups with each other. And I believe that, you know, we get back to this whole poor self-concept of everyone in the family, and then that's why this problem comes about. I think working on family therapy to kind of elevate some of that self-concept to guide yourself to some different answers other than incest to your problems is worthwhile. I think it works.
I know Florence doesn't agree with you.
Well, I have a thing about the family. I think that the making the family sacrosanct happens to be one of the things that has enslaved everybody, men, women, and children. There is no other way that we have no alternatives to raising children in the world in which we live today, and I think that is totally unfortunate. So being forced into that situation without an alternative kind of gives us no way out. I think that incestuous fathers should be separated from the daughters whom they are subjecting to this incest.
But certainly not in a way that punishes the daughter.
No, absolutely never in a way that punishes the daughter. I don't think the daughter should be sent away. I think it should be made very, very clear that what the father has done is wrong, that the father is the one who has the power. He's the grown-up. He's usually the most powerful figure in the family. The child is usually the most helpless one in the family. I feel very, very strongly that through the raised consciousness that women are getting today, that hopefully mothers will not feel anymore that their only identification is with a man whom she is married to, and who will be able to evaluate a situation in terms of what a man who is in an incestuous relationship with his daughter is doing to the daughter and to the entire family, and to be able to find the strength, hopefully, to take her daughter and move away from that situation. I think it is intrinsically harmful and bad. And I would add that I feel the same way about physically abusive parents, whether it is the mother or the father. I cannot understand the rehabilitation of families where children are sent back and repeatedly beaten and abused. And in the situations that I have known, where the father has been gone back into the family, either he has gotten into the relationship with the same daughter or with the younger daughter. and that I think that the only alternative being family rehabilitation is not a good enough alternative.
All right, well, you've offered two alternatives here. The one thing that I don't want to be accused of, you know, people watching the program, is that we've been only talking about men molesting little girls. What are the percentages again? Is it 97%?
Men, yes.
Men, as with women, 3% women. Now, I would say that for purposes of social studies, there are so few women that molest children that I usually do not present it as a figure that has to be dealt with. The thing is that the problem is essentially one of sexism, of men sexually abusing women and children, just as it is in rape.
You would draw that parallel to rape, then?
Definitely.
That parallel I would draw to rape. Otherwise, I would say that it is more with it is an oppression of men over women and children, because men are raping and sexually abusing boys also.
But you're more hopeful about the situation than you are in we as a society being able to do something about it. You're more hopeful that we can stop sexual abuse of children more quickly than we can rape. Is that true?
I
are, Linda.
I would partially agree with that statement. Basically, I think the incest taboo is correct.
15 seconds.
How about you?
I would really think that I don't know that we can control it. My great big hope is in the women's movement and what women are doing in terms of encouraging women to be stronger and to make claim to their own bodies, and all women, including daughters and nieces, are being taught to behave in very much the same way.
We're out of time.
Okay.
Oh. I thank you both for being here. Thank you for watching, and good night.
This program was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding was provided by public television stations. Additional support was provided by unrestricted general program grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.